I'm Channy Peters for BCB, Bainbridge Community Broadcasting, with Ann Lovejoy. On this joyous day, the opening ceremony for Owen's Playground. Ann is a longtime Bainbridge Island community member and an author and a passionate gardener. I'm so delighted that you are willing to come over and have a few words with us. Thank you, Ann.
Of course, Jenny, it's my pleasure.
I understand that you have built this magnificent garden of sensory and edible plants. Why was that important?
Well, the whole sensory piece, of course, is hugely important, especially for people who might be nonverbal, but even for anyone who's as verbal as me, which is a lot. Because we interpret the world through our senses, right? So part of it for me was texture, color, fragrance, and flavor. And so this garden is meant to be experienced on every possible level. No matter what your abilities or disabilities, there's something here that's going to be magical for you. But of course, when you are working with people who may have various kinds of disabilities, you have to really consider a number of things. If you have a compromised immune system, for instance, you might be affected by excess pollen. You don't want too many bees where children's play, so you can't have super bee attracting plants, though ordinarily, of course, I would be planting those. You have to think about things like, is it toxic in any part at all? Or if it's very fragrant, you could even trigger a seizure in someone. So you have to consider all these various things when you're choosing plants. And even in terms of color, because, for instance, bees don't see red very well. So I chose a lot of things in the red spectrum, which are less attractive to bees. Which isn't that interesting?
Good idea.
I know, you've got to think about it. But I also wanted stuff that was fun to look at. So part of what's going to happen here, this is full right now of things like nasturtiums and kale, cabbages, strawberries, and all placed at heights where you could reach from a wheelchair and pick a tomato and eat it, and then pick a piece of basil and eat that. So you can make your salad as you walk along the path, right? So it's very accessible in that sense. But as things grow on, there's going to be lots of other sorts of things too. Interesting shapes, interesting textures that feel fascinating, and I'm going to do what I call my petting zoo for plants so that you could go along and stroke all these various things. You'd release a little fragrance. Here there's a curry plant that smells just like curry powder. How weird is that? There's lavender, of course, and that sort of thing, but also many of these plants smell weird. Like some things smell like peanut butter. Some things, I know, smell like watermelon rind. It's very strange. And there are berries that taste exactly like slightly scorched homemade butterscotch. Seriously, Chinese shrub. So all these things are going to be incorporated so that people can have a very full experience as they ramble or stroll or push their way through this lovely spiral. Isn't that cool?
That is amazing. And this garden is vast. I thought that it was just going to be a little itty bitty thing, but you seem to have worked it into all the play areas. Was that in the initial plan?
No, initially it was that very small corner over on the side that was going to be the sensory garden, but their mistake was they asked me. And once I'm involved, you're in trouble, right? Well, and one of the things we realized is we needed to soften. There's a great deal of hardscape in here because there needs to be, of course, for accessibility. But in order to balance that, you also need a lot of life. And so there's wood and rock, there's water and rubber, but there's also this whole flow of plants. And the biggest piece for me was incorporating the community. So when I figured out what we wanted, we were going to start with annuals and edibles, I started inviting the community to help me plant things and handed out packages of seed, and children and school groups and families grew on all these things, and of course then they came and helped plant them and became engaged, and now some of those same people are helping to care for the garden. How cool is that?
And you have some very special things in the garden. Tell us about the fig tree.
The keystone anchor plant in that original sensory garden bed was a fig tree that my mom had been grown in a pot in her apartment for many years and just adored that fig tree. And she got actual figs off it too, which is kind of amazing. And when late in life she came to live with me, I, of course, had to bring her entire garden with her, and including the fig in the pot. And I just thought, what a lovely way to carry that forward by putting it in a place where it will offer figs for a whole new generation. Sweet.
There are also some structures for growing vines, and I think they're quite unusual, if I understand correctly. Could you tell us about two of them?
I certainly will. If you look, there's two portal kind of trellises that are dark green, and those were originally bicycle racks. They had kind of a sine curve of metal tubing, and I captured those when they were getting tossed away and decided they had to be recycled. So the clever Parks crew turned them into wonderful, wonderful trellises. And we've got Concord grapes on one and we're putting golden hops on another. That's very magical. But for my favorite, I think, is what I call the Hobbit House, which I had asked if the guys could put together a little bean trellis for me, maybe a handful of rebar with some wire at the top to make kind of a teepee, right? No, they laminated 5 or 6 kinds of beautiful wood, steamed this gentle curve like a boat, made a gorgeous finial to go on the top, and then wove it together with these panels so plants can clamber up it, and it makes an incredible little playhouse. This is the imagination and the heart. This is truly a labor of love. You don't see that as a real thing in real life very often. This is a real labor of love.
And because of that, as you pointed out, people have a vested interest in maintaining this and caring for it. So they'll be coming back to do that.
Well, and we are going to have an edible portion every year where people will be planting and growing and coming and putting things into the ground for us every year. Because I think that's part of it too, weaving people through the garden, not just children, but people of all ages. That's really important.
And this is magical, it really is. And how wonderful to have so many of our much-loved members of the community be a part of this. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome, and I can't think of a more nourishing project for the whole community than this.